Welcome. Thank you for joining this committee engagement session on return to school planning. First, I'll take this opportunity to thank each of you for your support, understanding, and all that you did to help the children of our community continue with their education during distance learning. Tonight, we're here to share our latest planning and ongoing challenges. You will hear and see the results of intense work of 12 return to school planning teams. We can all be proud of how smart and hard these teams are performing. Please know that instead of waiting for the state and federal governments to formulate and issue new directives and guidelines, these teams use science and strategic planning to prepare for the reopening of our schools. Fortunately, subsequently released guidelines and directives all aligned with these draft plans. As you watch these presentations, please be mindful these are our latest concepts. Guidelines, directives, rules can all change, and therefore we may need to pivot and adapt abruptly. I'll now turn the microphone over to Dr. Jenna Mitchler, our Assistant Superintendent, to facilitate the presentations.
Good evening, everyone. We appreciate you all tuning in tonight. Tonight, we've invited several leaders to be here, members of our fall planning team, to provide updates on our fall planning. Those people who are here include Andy Kubis, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, John Weiser, Executive Director of Technology and Information Systems, Katrina Mesera, Manager of Digital Learning and Data, Rachel Jens, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Carmen Meyer, Special Education Supervisor, Rod Zikovich, Executive Director of Business Services, and Jake Winchell, Executive Director of Community Education. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that if you have something you'd like to ask someone on our team who I've just introduced, please respond to bit.ly/return to school. I also want to mention that our promotional efforts for tonight's evening have gotten us a lot of feedback, and from our families and staff, we appreciate that feedback. We will likely answer a number of those questions that have come up tonight in the presentations that follow, but please make sure that you are responding to our bit.ly if you have other questions you'd like us to ask, and we will ask them during our remaining time tonight. So let's get started with John Weiser.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Weiser, Executive Director of Technology and Information Services for the district. I'm here tonight to give you an overview of the 4 educational models for this fall. We started our fall planning in May when it became clear that the district needed multiple options for families this fall. At that time, the Minnesota Department of Education first named 3 models. Begin the 2021 school year in traditional school, or begin the school year in hybrid or distance learning. While school was still in session last spring, we sought feedback from families and staff, and the data was presented at board sessions by our community relations and research and evaluation leaders. Additionally, on June 18th, the Minnesota Department of Education published a 100-page guidance document for schools to frame their fall planning. The plans you see tonight are built on the feedback from our families and staff, as well as the current guidance from the MDE. Lastly, the governor recently announced that he will provide additional guidance on July 15th, that's tomorrow, and that MDE will share decisions about school opening in the last week of July. Our plans are current, but we will adjust according to whatever additional guidance we get from the state. In addition to the 3 MDE models, we're developing a 4th option. Back 1 slide, please. In addition to the 3 MDE models, we're developing a 4th option, Bloomington Online School. We heard through our spring surveys that some families and staff are uncertain about returning to any form of face-to-face school this fall. And we believe we have the expertise to create an option better than any of those being advertised to our families from organizations outside of Bloomington. MDE guidelines require us to plan for options for families who do not wish to return to school face-to-face. Bloomington Online School will be that option for our families. Here's what we know from the MDE model choice so far. The current MDE language says the decision of model, either traditional, hybrid, or distance learning, will be based on, quote, local, regional, or state COVID-19 metrics. We may be directed to begin school in the traditional model if COVID-19 metrics are, quote, stable and improving. We may be directed to begin school in the hybrid model if COVID-19 metrics are, quote, worsening at the local, regional, statewide level, or within a cluster. And we may need to shift to distance learning 2.0 if COVID-19 metrics are, quote, worsening significantly. Based on these metrics, you can see that while we may start school in one model, we will need to be ready to transition to any of the others. Additionally, though we're preparing the district to have a single model, we may be required to adjust models at the individual school level. Important events in our summer timeline include Governor Walz's announcement that he will provide additional guidance on July 15th, and that MDE will share decisions about school opening in the last week of July. On August 11th, we will give another public update with details for families on which model will begin the 2021 school year. And then throughout the year, if we are to experience a change in model, either district-wide or at a single site, we would notify families as early as possible. So we're here tonight to talk in a little more detail about each of the potential models. Again, we're sharing details about these four models: Bloomington Online School, Distance Learning 2.0, Hybrid, and Traditional School. I'll start with Bloomington Online School, as it's the district's digital learning team that is leading the development of the program. In the spring and early summer, our community relations and research and evaluation surveys showed that 32% of our families were uncertain about returning to face-to-face school this fall, and 26% of those who were uncertain said they were considering a fully online option. Our staff surveys showed 16% of our staff were uncertain about returning to work in the fall. And nearly half of those staff surveyed responded that they would be interested in teaching or providing support in an entirely online learning environment. Additionally, we have an excellent track record in providing online options. We're in our third year of providing fully online courses at our two high schools, and nearly 40% of our high school students took an online course this last year. So we have some current success and experience to build upon. We have families who are actively looking for options, and we believe that building a fully online offering now will present future opportunities for programming throughout the K-12 system. For these reasons, we are developing Bloomington Online School. Our elementary work group, led by Elementary Digital Learning Coordinator Holly Skadsum, with partners in learning and teaching and special education, has developed around several principles. Elementary programming is being designed to be responsive to student needs and to take an interdisciplinary approach. We believe it's important to have a balance of on-screen and off-screen learning activities, and to be intentional about building relationships and community among our students and families. Our secondary work group, led by Andrew Rummel, our secondary digital learning coordinator. As with elementary, there will be a focus on building a collaborative community with consideration for academics as well as the social emotional needs of our students. Courses are being designed to be engaging and interactive, and based on feedback from distance learning this spring, we will be emphasizing consistency in course practices like a single platform and streamlined posting of coursework. This summer, we've been partnering with the University of Minnesota to accelerate this work. We have a lot of staff who've rearranged their summer plans and are working diligently to create an online program that we can all be proud of. Over 75 staff members have been working on content development and within work groups to tackle the difficult challenges in starting an online program. Those work groups are represented with school leaders, classroom teachers, special education, leadership and teaching, and EL teachers. Additionally, we are beginning a parent advisory in August to help guide the program development this fall. We have additional information on the BPS website, so if you're interested in more information about Bloomington Online School, you can go to one of our website pages, search for the keywords Bloomington Online School, and you'll find more information there. We will be opening registration to families starting tomorrow, July 15th, and going through the end of the month. The first family advisory meeting is scheduled for August 11th, and the orientation for students and families is scheduled for the week of August 17th through the 24th. Bloomington Online School will follow the same school calendar as other Bloomington schools, so the first day of school will be August 31st. So that's a snapshot of the plans for Bloomington Online School. Next, I'll turn it over to Executive Director Andy Kubis to talk a little bit about the Distance Learning 2.0 model. Andy?
Thanks, John. I wanted to talk to you tonight, again, as John mentioned, about Distance Learning 2.0. And I want to reiterate what was talked about earlier, that we'll move to a distance learning model when conditions worsen significantly, to use the words of the MDE. This is a model that we won't choose necessarily. This will be a model that will be chosen for us. On balance, I think as we look at Distance Learning 1.0, where we all jumped into in March, the feedback that we got from our families and our staff members and our students is that we did pretty well with Distance Learning 1.0. Some of that was very difficult given the timeline that we had to work with. We had 8 days to design something that could have taken 8 months to design properly. And so I think one of the things that we did very well is we listened to our stakeholders, we listened to our community, we listened to our teachers, and we listened to our students. And we were able to move within that model to continue to make it better. And by the end, although this is not a perfect model for anyone, we think that we moved into a direction where it was workable for most families. Having said that, we know that there are some students and families and teachers who were left behind in this model, not only in the Bloomington Public Schools, but across the nation. We know that we have students who come to school for stability, for resources, and for help, and many of those students were left home, and we had to figure out how to reach them. And so as we move into a 2.0 version, a modified, better version of this, that's one of the things that we are really seriously considering, is how do we help the students who may be left behind in school. Even in the best of models, if we think back to August of 2019, maybe a year ago, when we were going into the school year thinking that everything was going to be normal, we know that that traditional school doesn't work for all kids. And we know that distance learning does nothing but exacerbate that. So we are working very, very hard to make sure that we're reaching everyone. We do very well at solving problems when we know what the problems are. As an example, John Weiser just handed over to me. Our technology group does a very, very good job of solving problems around access and technology, but only if they know where the problems are. And so many times we have to think about ways out of the box to figure out who's struggling, who needs the help. And many times we rely on our great relationships here in the Bloomington Public Schools. We have great teachers, we have great resources and great team members who help people who might not fill out a survey or might not raise their hand to say that we need help, and we need to really double down and make sure that we're reaching all students and all families with Distance Learning 2.0. To give you some background on the process that's been happening so far, leading and facilitating this Distance Learning 2.0 is Kelly Spees, one of our teacher leaders. And she's facilitating the process and getting lots of feedback from our instructional teams, from our teachers, and reading through feedback from some of the surveys that you took at home and some of the feedback that we're getting from our students and staff members here. A little bit of history. Through the month of May, teachers, leaders, we debriefed Distance Learning 1.0 and talked about what went well and what still could get better. On June 15th, staff, parents, and student feedback were shared with the planning team, where more plans and tweaks were made. On June 30th, we came up with a skeleton of what a distance learning plan might look like. And throughout today, through the rest of July and into August, We'll modify that plan to make sure it's the best plan should we have to go to this based on conditions worsening significantly. There are a couple issues that came up through your feedback and that came up through the teacher feedback and student feedback that I wanted to assure you that we're working on. The first, in no particular order, the first one was synchronous versus asynchronous learning. Those are education terms, but essentially it means have a teacher being in front of her students in real time in front of the computer. In other words, maybe in a second grade class, the teacher would say, at 9 o'clock, I'm going to teach you how to do two-digit division. When we first started this conversation, the guidance that we were getting was do not engage in this type of learning. It leaves some students out. What if they can't get there for that 9 o'clock class? As we moved on, we realized what outweighed that is kids need to see their teachers, and kids need to see each other. And so we morphed and changed that. And so one of the questions that we're getting is, will there be synchronous learning in Distance Learning 2.0 if we have to go to that? And the answer is yes. How that will look and at what frequency is still left to be determined, but we heard teachers, students, and parents loud and clear that synchronous learning is important for the kids to have connection and for the teachers to be there for everyone. Another concern that came up through our feedback was the amount of work that was happening in the digital learning. And so, again, in Education Ease, we talk about priority standards. In every class, there are many standards that have to be met. And I think organizationally what we did in Distance Learning 1.0 is we tried to do it all because we wanted our students to be very successful. What we've learned in emergency school is that we have to prioritize what gets taught, knowing that students are doing this work and many times without support. And we're going to help our teachers get to those priority standards and helping them out with instructional strategies so they can be successful. And the last question that comes up often is, what about the people who don't have access? How are we getting to those? I alluded to it earlier. We've got plans to be able to reach out to families to make sure that if they're struggling, we'll be there to help them. We do a very, very good job of helping people when we know they need help. It's incumbent upon us to dig deeper to figure out who needs that help. So that's the update as we move forward to Distance Learning 2.0. Again, a plan we'll move to if things worsen, but we'll be ready with that plan, and it will be a better plan than our 1.0 version. With that, I'll turn it over to Katrina Mesra and Rachel Jens to talk about the hybrid plan.
Good evening. I'm Rachel Jens. I serve as the Curriculum and Instruction Director for the district, and I'm excited to share some of our current plans around hybrid instruction with you tonight. In a hybrid model of schooling, learning is facilitated using a combination of in-person instruction and remote learning activities. There are many variations of hybrid instruction, and so over the last few weeks, we have worked as a district to select a model that we believe will serve our students and families well should we not be able to return to school in a traditional model this fall. We started our process of selecting a model for hybrid instruction by bringing together an advisory team comprised of administrators, teachers, and support staff. This team looked at several potential models for hybrid instruction, narrowing models through an evaluation process and by soliciting feedback from wider groups of stakeholders. We were able to bring a final recommendation to our leadership team and our school board in June. At that time, the selected model was a skeleton, and we've been since working on adding additional detail to that model, working with implementation work groups throughout the last few weeks. The advisory team filtered each of the possible models being considered through these 5 lenses, noting both the merits and the potential challenges associated with the model. Some of the things that we considered were the model's ability to provide for the physical health and safety of our students and staff, the model's ability to support high-quality instruction and learning, as well as social, emotional, and mental health supports for students. We also looked at whether the model would support our students with special needs. And finally, we looked at the model's ability to continue allowing us to execute smooth school and district operations. including transportation as an example. After narrowing viable hybrid models using that criteria and soliciting stakeholder feedback, we've selected a hybrid model that we have termed the assigned days model. Under this model, all K-12 students will physically attend their school 2 days per week for in-person instruction. On the days that students are not physically attending school, they'll engage in remote learning using a combination of digital and analog learning tools. Cohorts of students will attend school on either Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays. We continue to look at and evaluate options for Wednesday, possibly making Wednesday a day for remote learning for all, allowing for additional cleaning in our buildings, or using Wednesday as an additional in-person learning day. We're also leaving room in this model for some students in special populations to attend school physically more frequently. We believe that this model is the most viable hybrid model for our community, given its ability to address considerations within each of the 5 lenses that the various models explored were filtered through. From a physical health and safety perspective, our assigned days model allows for social distancing on both district transportation vehicles as well as in our classrooms. It also provides sufficient time for cleaning and disinfecting of spaces and materials on a regular basis. It limits potential exposure by grouping students into consistent cohorts for attendance. We've been able to identify school and classroom capacities that meet both Minnesota Department of Education and Minnesota Department of Health hybrid requirements. We've also started exploring scheduling adjustments as needed to promote physical health and safety for students and staff. From a teaching and learning perspective, this model allows for deeper instruction and more subjects to be addressed throughout the day than a half-day model. It minimizes the amount of time potentially lost to transitions and transportation, and also provides for spaced intervals of regular in-person learning and contact with teachers and other staff members, which we know is vitally important for our students. Our hybrid instruction work groups have been working hard to study, recommend, and plan strategies for both in-person and remote learning that will include a balanced combination of direct, focused instruction, guided instruction, collaborative learning opportunities for students, and independent learning.
Along with physical health and academics, the social and emotional well-being of all of our students has been an important consideration. The assigned days hybrid schedule allows for 2 days a week of in-person learning for all of our students, as well as to interact with classmates and grow in their classroom and school communities. It also gives our staff a chance to interact with our students and to notice when students are struggling socially, emotionally, and to help get them additional support as may be needed. For all our students, we're preparing welcome back experiences to help them transition back to school, whatever school looks like in the fall, including relationships, community building, and the security of predictable and familiar routines. When considering the hybrid model, we were careful in considering how it would support all of our students' varying needs, including those receiving service for special education, our English language learners, our gifted and talented students, and more. The full day, 2-week, face-to-face model we've selected allows enough time in a day for both general education and additional support as needed. Many teams throughout the district are preparing ways to support special populations. For example, our special education leadership team is preparing for the possibility of a hybrid model by looking at service delivery for students with IEPs. They're working on how to deliver special education services, both in face-to-face settings as well as by remote delivery. In doing this, they can use all the available time and support and will be more ready for whatever model comes our way in the fall. Lastly, any model we chose, we know it needed to work within our operations capabilities for transportation, food services, facilities, and more. For example, splitting students into 2 cohorts for attendance allows transportation and classrooms to be at 50% capacity and maintain social distancing according to our state level guidance. Students and parents look for bus schedules to be released on the hub in early August as normal. So we started in June with the bones of a plan and bit by bit are adding a little bit of muscle. We're committed to having the full hybrid plan ready to implement by August 31st, should we need it at any point throughout the year. Now I'll turn it over to Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Andy Kubis, to talk about the traditional model.
Thanks, Katrina. Back again to talk about a traditional model. So as John Weiser talked about, as he referenced the MDE guidance, if we are in a place where we think we can move forward, we're guessing that the MDE and the governor will make us go back in a traditional sense. And so we know how to do traditional school. We've done it for 100 years. So we're quite confident that we'll be able to go back to this model without too much reservation. Some of the current thinking around that work, as I mentioned, the MDE lists traditional school as an option, and we're following suit in our alignment as we began that planning, knowing that we need to have all options ready. We're prepared for all situations, and while unknown still at this time, we're ready for a traditional school option. We need a home base to work from. All of us, families out there, people in the room, teachers and everyone, we know what school looks like in a traditional sense. We need to have a home base to operate from. And lastly, families and students are often anchored in familiarity. And someday, a large percentage of us will return to normal school, normal in air quotes. Although I'll add, I don't know that school will ever be normal again as we know it. And I know that Rod Zivkovich is going to talk about some facility stuff in the future. But some of the things that we will be considering is what will normal school look like? And that's some of the work that we're doing. For any of you that flew in the 80s and 90s, you know that flying in 2020 is significantly different than it was back then for the obvious reasons. Our 14-year-old and 11-year-old at our house, they know nothing different. They only know that you take your shoes off when you go to the airport and you walk through different scanners to make sure that you're safe. Things change, and we think that schooling is going to change based on COVID henceforth, and we need to be ready for that to help out and keep our staff and students safe. Some of the things that we're considering in a traditional model is much like what has been talked about with the hybrid model. From a physical health and safety, as I just alluded to, we want to make sure that we have practices in place to keep our students and our staff healthy. It's very, very, very important that our staff and our students are protected and feel confident and comfortable coming to work, knowing that they're safe. We want to make sure that we have high quality instruction and learning. So far we've engaged in some of those facility conversations. Once we get further guidance from the MDE, we'll start planning around what are some of the instructional strategies that might have changed since COVID. You can imagine a second grade classroom where there are 5 or 6 kids close around a table huddled listening to the teacher read a book. We wonder if those days will happen anymore and what instructional strategies might we need for teachers to be effective in a new environment. We also need to know that we need to support our staff and students around mental health, unpacking what happened in the spring. It was a traumatic event what happened when school was shut down. Whether our students have the ability to say that out loud or not, we know that it impacted them. We know that it impacted our staff, and we need to make sure that we have support to help students in a traditional sense, if we go back that way, come back into that setting and be supported in lots of different ways. Carmen Meyer is going to talk next about our supporting our special populations, and so we'll let her do that. I won't say too much about that, but the last part is the school district operations. What might getting on a bus look like anymore? What might lunch look like? And again, I know Rod Zivkovich and his team are working on that. So traditional school, we've done very well, as I mentioned, about 100 years in Bloomington, but we know that we're going to have to adapt if we go back based on some guidelines from the CDC and from the Minnesota Department of Health, and we're ready to do that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carmen Meyer.
Thank you, Andy. Again, I'm Carmen Meyer. Good evening, Special Education Supervisor. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the development of supports and services for students with disabilities who receive special education services. For any of our students who receive special education, they will be able to access a continuum of services through any of the Bloomington Public Schools models being presented tonight. Special education staff are involved with the various work groups, and we are currently examining service delivery systems for each learning model. The foundation for all of the services starts with the least restrictive environment in mind through the coordination of services with general education and core content classes. Special education staff are participating in the various work groups, which allow for the collaborative conversations and program development for educational programming in all of these educational models. As the work groups continue to further develop programming options for all students, the special education department will align with the recommendations as well as following along with the Minnesota Department of Health and the Centers for Disease Control and Protection guidelines. Both individual education program and individual family service program teams will meet to review and determine specifically designed instruction to address the needs of all students. Those discussions include, but are not limited to, direct, indirect, and related services, while adhering to the work group recommendations for traditional hybrid or distance learning models. The Bloomington Online School will have a continuum of specialized instructional supports for K-12 students. Services will range from synchronous online instruction, teletherapy from related services, consultation, curriculum accommodations and modifications as determined by the individual education program teams. Any educational program changes will be addressed through due process procedures of an individual program or individual family service team meeting. Next, to speak about facilities, transportation, and food service is Executive Director of Finance and Support Services, Rod Ziskovich.
Thank you, Carmen. My name is Rod Zivkovich, Executive Director of Finance and Support Services. I'm here tonight to speak about the work that we've been doing regarding the facilities, transportation, and food service. Similar to a lot of the discussions that have been made to date about the educational model, we also have been behind the scenes working, trying to support each of these groups on what they need to provide for the transportation, facilities, and food service. Making sure that we're always following the guidelines of the Minnesota Department of Health, the CDC, and trying to, as we do a normal budgeting process similar, of letting the programming people tell us what they need, and then we try to see how we fit into that need and how we can do it both financially and facility-wise. So what we did is we had a team set up of district administrators, principals at each of the levels. We had our architect involved. We had our health and safety consultant involved in the process of making sure that we're not missing anything of just our own knowledge, but also the knowledge of what's out there both locally in Minnesota and also out there nationally. So with that, we started our first part of the process was just looking at our sites, making sure that we could meet the hybrid model capabilities of having 50% of the students in our buildings and working that through. I think we've come to an agreement with everybody. I think we have that point of where we're at right now. We just now need to just find a couple of the places where we're a little tighter of how we modify things to be able to accomplish those same goals. One of the big issues with that is the whole personal protection equipment. What we've done as a district as of to date is we have already brought into the district enough masks for all staff members, and we're in the process right now of supplies for all students also. So all those processes of getting personal protection equipment are in place to be here for the start of the school year. As I move on to transportation, it's the same item with our trying to meet the guidelines for the hybrid model. which is reducing the buses down to 50%. And as you can imagine, in an elementary school where you're putting 3 kids on a bus, trying to get that down to 50% and still having distancing, we find challenges with that. We're working on different processes of trying to make that happen, along with providing the personal protection equipment to allow us for that distancing. The last area is with food service. Looking at food service, whether it be the traditional model or whether it be the hybrid model, we are developing right now dividers for the cafeterias so that students will have protection while they're eating in the cafeteria areas. And as I mentioned, can be used for both the hybrid model and the traditional model. And as we work through other areas, making sure we have those dividers available. We also kind of, what I haven't mentioned with the facilities, also any entering into a building, the main entrances and also main offices, of having protection to those first people that as you walk into a building, there'll also be plexiglass protection for them also. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jake Winzel, the Executive Director of Community Education.
Thank you, Rod. My name is Jake Winchell. I'm the Executive Director of Community Education. I'm here tonight to discuss plans that Bloomington Public Schools will be able to offer in any model of school delivery when it comes to childcare. At this time, there are many unanswered questions that prevent us from providing you with a definitive plan, but we have teams working very hard to be ready to offer you a quality childcare experience in any model of schooling. Many undecided factors that will affect how we proceed include, may we charge a fee? If you remember back to the springtime, we could not charge a fee. Who is eligible for childcare? Is it open to everybody? What is a critical worker? Are we going to have Tier 1 and Tier 2 workers have priority, or can we prioritize our teaching staff so we can have our teachers here in order to offer school for our students? And obviously the biggest question is, what is the school delivery model and what will school look like, and that will dictate what childcare looks like. In a traditional model of school, childcare is easy. We've done it for many years. We provide Kids Safari before and after school care. We've done it for many years, and we'll be ready to offer that. In a hybrid model, things get a little different. Working with each elementary school, looking at unused space and possibly repurposing some space, looking at creating classrooms that could be used for childcare. The size of a cohort will dictate how many seats we can offer. If right now in summer childcare we can offer 9 students in a classroom. If that's the case, that changes what our capacity is. We are hoping to up that capacity potentially up to 15 students per classroom. If we're able to make 2 classrooms in every elementary school of 15, that's 30 students per elementary school site, times 10 elementary schools, we'd be able to provide upwards of 300 total spaces for childcare daily. In distance learning 2.0, we would look at probably childcare, what it would look like last spring, where we would probably be reduced down to 1 or 2 sites where we could use many more classrooms. We'd have the whole building to use instead of using just a few spaces in each elementary school. The big questions we need to answer is who's eligible for childcare, and if demand exceeds capacity, how do we fill those last remaining seats? Likely a lottery system. Our biggest challenges will be staffing, as we've begun the process to prepare for staffing in any model, and we'll be ready to pivot as that changes. A big question we will have is, what if we move from in-person learning into distance learning, or vice versa? How can we pivot and make sure we can provide childcare uninterrupted for families? And obviously space is going to be a big question. We do feel that capacity may not meet the demand of childcare in our community, so we will do what we can to offer that space. In any sense, we have worked hard to be ready to offer childcare no matter what model we have. So after next week, when we receive guidance on what school will look like, we will quickly be able to turn around a childcare plan as soon as we can get it staffed, and we'll have a plan finalized in early August. That is the end of my report. I'll turn it back to Dr. Jenna Mitchler.
Thank you all for those presentations. A lot of hard work has gone in so far to the planning, and a lot of hard work continues, so thank you for that. I want to restate that there's a link that you can go to as viewers to provide feedback and questions, and that link is bit.ly /BPS/ my mistake, -return. So bit.ly/BPS-return. I know there's many of you viewing tonight. We've gotten lots of questions so far, so if you continue to use that link for your feedback and your questions, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Keep in mind that we'll also be posting responses to our district website if we don't get to them tonight. So we have about 45 minutes remaining tonight. So I'll begin posing some questions to our panelists who are here tonight, who have some of the questions that we've previously received, and then also some of those questions that continue to come in tonight. So as I said, please note that we've received a lot of questions already and feedback, which is wonderful. We really look to that feedback to help with our planning. And unfortunately, we'll not have enough time to get to all of those questions and the answers, but do watch for that to be posted on our frequently asked questions section of our website on the district's page. So with that, I'm going to start with some of our questions. The first question is about Bloomington Online School, so I'll pose this question to John Weiser. The question is, if we choose the online school, how long do we need to commit to attending? Is it for the year, the semester, etc.? And I'll just add to that question, there's an additional component that just came in, is if it's the middle of the year and my child wishes to switch back to traditional school, is that an option they would have?
Yeah, this is a common question that we've gotten in our information sessions. We are asking families to commit to a 1 year of Bloomington Online School, and I'll tell you why. There's two main reasons. One is stability. Just like with any other school, we're looking for a stable and successful experience for our kids. That stability comes from teachers knowing who their students are and students getting to know each other. So that stability in instruction and in the makeup of a classroom is important to the success of this program. The other main factor around that stability is community. We've put an emphasis on building community in creating this program, and that community happens through the extended experiences of students talking to other students, students getting to know their teacher, and teachers getting to know their students and families. So for those reasons, we're asking for that 1 year commitment. That being said, we always have we don't want anybody to have a bad experience. And so we have a process within the district, an intra-district transfer process that we use throughout the school year for students who join the district mid-year or who need to switch schools mid-year. We want those switches to be rare and meaningful, but there is a process in place for families to employ if it was needed.
Great, thank you for that, John. The next question is with regard to the hybrid model. So I'll pose this question to either Rachel Jens or Katrina Mesera. The question is, how does hybrid learning work with regard to staffing, is the question here. So is one teacher in charge of online learning while there's another separate teacher in charge of face-to-face learning? How does that work?
I can take that one. Hybrid instruction work groups right now are working on collecting those different strategies that may work for continuing learning through in-person and remote delivery. And so looking for a learning cycle and patterns that are going to work for both our students and our teachers. So for example, a teacher may teach a face-to-face group on Monday, and then as they leave out the door on Monday, set up to use that new learning to review, to practice, to apply it in a new way, perhaps collaboratively on Tuesday. To the question of is it two separate teachers in charge of online and face-to-face? In order to reach a 50% capacity in our classrooms, we will, for the most part, have all teachers teaching face-to-face on most days, on those assigned face-to-face days. There may be some exceptions, but for the most part, all teachers would be teaching face-to-face each day.
Great, thank you for that, Katrina. Another question that's come in with regard to the hybrid model, I'll pose again to either of the two of you, Rachel or Katrina. In a hybrid model, what will students be expected to do on their at-home learning days?
Sure, my turn. Our hybrid work groups are planning for ways to provide a learning cycle that does include that very purposeful combination of focused instruction, guided instruction with timely feedback from both teachers and peers, collaborative learning experiences, and then independent learning. And so as an example, on a remote learning day, students might be invited to a synchronous Google Meet by their teacher where they can ask questions, they can get support, or possibly participate in a small group mini lesson. Another option might be that they have an asynchronous activity to do. Perhaps they would watch a video and complete some sort of response to that video. Or maybe they would have an assigned text to read and to complete a written response to that text. Or they might be working in a Google Meet with their peers to do a collaborative learning activity, to discuss something that they have read or viewed on a video. It's really critical that we look at ways we are up to the challenge of ensuring that we're planning for that seamless transition from in-person learning to remote learning by making sure that we're planning for activities on the remote learning days that reinforce and extend the in-person teaching and learning that has happened on the face-to-face days.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Looks like the next question is with regard to distance learning 2.0. So Andy Kubis, I'll pose this question to you. Understanding that distance learning is extraordinarily hard for parents to manage the children and help them engage, how will teachers address items in the curriculum that are, we might say, like must-do items versus items that are a good idea to do?
That's a great question. I alluded to it earlier in the presentation, but I think as we started distance learning 1.0, and I'll paint with broad strokes here, but as educators, we bend over backwards to help students be successful. And I think one of the things that we did as an organization is we try to do it all. We try to replicate exactly what happened in the classroom online. And the feedback that we got in real time from both students, not both, but all three, students, families, and teachers was, this is too much. And so what we needed to do and what we've been talking about, as I mentioned earlier, every class has standards attached to them that the teachers strive for their students to get to. We need to, and we've done the work, but helps our teachers understand what are the priority standards, what must be looked after in this class. So you can imagine a scenario, like I said before, we won't choose a distance learning model. It will be chosen for us based on data and based on cases of COVID and things that are happening outside of our control. When we morph into a distance learning model, what we need to do is help our staff be able also to make that switch and figure out, okay, I can't replicate necessarily what's happening every day, but what are the priority things that need to happen over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to make sure that our students are continuing to grow, but at the same time understanding that they don't have all the supports that they have at school. Mom and dad might be working. They might be with the older brother or whatever the case may be. So we have to take that into account as we move into a distance learning, to the point of the question asker around necessity things as opposed to things that are just nice to know.
Thank you for that, Andy. So I have another question here from a parent who has an IEP. So I'll ask Carmen Meyer to help us with this question for special education. So this parent says, my student has an IEP and online learning just doesn't seem like a good option for my student. What's a plan for, or what is the plan for those students who need the hands-on and in-person support?
So again, we are working with all of the work groups to address those social, emotional, behavioral, academic, adaptive communication needs for the students. And we're looking at ways that we can use or incorporate our strategies into those direct and indirect services that the students need. We're looking at other additional supports and aligning with the overall educational program that is going on with students. The special education teams are also developing instructional approaches to work with the students during face-to-face and the remote learning. So that may mean some different service delivery models so that we can address and meet all of the needs of students. And there again, we are discussing those things in teams to ensure and recommend that we are following the safeguards and the considerations on our public health guidelines.
Thank you for that, Carmen. Another question for Bloomington Online School. A couple of questions here with regard to this. So this question will be for John Weiser again. If we choose the online option for school this year, will we lose our spot in the other school, the brick and mortar school that we would normally be enrolled in?
The short answer is no. We recognize this is an unusual year and it's an unusual experience for all of us. And so we want to put some safeguards in place that would allow parents some stability in making this decision without losing that stability when we come through this pandemic. So short answer is no. You won't lose your spot.
Thanks for that, John. Question here for early childhood education. So Jake, I'll pose this question to you. So the question is, what are the plans for early childhood students to return this fall?
Sure, thanks, Jenna. Much like the K through 12 system, we have early childhood teams working in ECFE and school readiness to come up with models. No matter which option the K through 12 system is in, we'll have something very similar. We have also looked at data from last spring to see what worked well and what did not work well to make improvements on what we can offer this fall if that's the model that we will be in. We are also looking at other maybe online platforms that we can use, online tools for parents to communicate with one another to make that experience better. So early childhood will follow the same model as the K through 12 system.
Thank you for that. Question here about PPE, personal protective equipment. And so, Rod, I believe you talked a little bit about this before. I'll pose this question to you. Is the district planning on providing PPE to all staff and students? And what provisions will be made to ensure all students and staff are wearing masks?
Thank you, Jenna. The process we're looking at right now is that we are going to be providing all masks for both the staff and students start of the year. I think there's going to be a lot of training with the students going through, just similar to Jake could probably give a little bit of what they saw with the summer school type programming that was, or summer programming that was when we did a sample of younger kids wearing masks and that, and it was better than we thought it would be. So I think it's more of a, as we are educational leaders, it's educating both students and staff to make sure that they are wearing them at the appropriate times during the school day.
Thanks, Rod. You had mentioned Jake. Jake, do you have anything you want to add with regard to that question?
Sure. Summer Child Care has piloted a mask program, so all of our staff are wearing masks, and we have asked the children to wear masks as well. And overall, it's gone really well with the children wearing masks, as long as they're appropriate size masks. At first, they were a little bit too big, and kids were touching them a lot, but as soon as we got the right size mask, it did start to go really well for us.
Thank you both. Another question here about the hybrid model. So I'll pose this to Rachel Jens and Katrina Mesera, whomever is most able to answer. So if the state does recommend for us the hybrid option, will parents be allowed to sign waivers for their children to attend more than half of the time?
Though I understand the desire for the answer to be yes, the answer is no. Just the math of it, we know that the hybrid model has a 50% capacity to it, and so as we split our schools in half, we won't have room for extra students in the school at any given time. So, no.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so a couple more questions here from for Bloomington Online. So John, I'll pose, I think, 2 questions here that look related. I'll pose them to you just one at a time. So the first one is, will honors and AP courses and the gifted and talented curriculum be offered at in the online school?
We will have some offerings for honors and AP courses. We have online offerings right now at Kennedy and Jefferson of AP and honors courses. We can't provide a matching course for everything in the Kennedy and Jefferson course catalog, but we will have a catalog that allows students to move forward from being a 9th grader to a 10th grader, 10th grader to an 11th grader toward graduation. And then in terms of gifted and talented, we are working with our gifted and talented team to provide flexible grouping and collaboration such that we can have enrichment activities for students as we would in a face-to-face classroom. So, yes.
Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, and you started to there answer the next question that I have here that's sort of related, which is just around acceleration and enrichment. So will acceleration and enrichment be available for students, or will they only be learning the standards at their grade level? And so you started to speak to that.
Yeah, I would say when you think of our task here, it's a pretty big task to try to replicate a high-quality education in an online environment without face-to-face instruction. But that is our goal. Our goal is to have high quality, and part of that high quality is having those enrichment activities, building community, having the whole variety of services that a child might get if they come to one of our schools face-to-face or in any of these models.
Thank you, John. I have a question here that I think is a compilation of probably many questions, and it's around special education. So I'm going to send this to Carmen. The question we have here is, in all of the potential models that we've described here tonight, how will special education students receive their services?
Great question. So again, we have special education staff that are involved in all of the work groups going on in the district. So we have the ability to have those collaborative conversations right now in the program planning. We are looking at different service delivery models currently for each of those programs, both online and hybrid, that would meet the individual student needs. Educational programming across the board will be inclusive of those related services also that students will receive, and determined by an individual education program team. So those teaming meetings will still be very important for us as we move forward. Continuum of services will also be provided in all of the different models that were discussed tonight. Just as they are in our traditional school, and those IEP teams will be asked to convene to talk about services for individual students.
Thank you, Carmen. Question around distance learning 2.0. So Andy Kubis, this question is for you. If classes don't happen daily in person, will there be an expectation for Google Meet classes for each class to have some face-to-face time with teachers? Something you spoke to a little bit before, but if you could elaborate a little.
Yeah, pardon me. The short answer is yes. The frequency we've not landed on yet, but the short answer is yes. And so as I mentioned before, we started out distance learning in the 1.0 version. That our best thinking at that time with guidance from different people were, let's not do any synchronous learning and leave people out. What we found and soon discovered through our students and our families and our teachers is that students need to see their peers, they need to see their classmates, they need to see their teacher, and vice versa. And so we morphed into where we had more synchronous learning that was happening. In order not to leave anybody out, one of the things that we stipulated, was that if you are going, as a teacher or an instructor, if you're going to do some synchronous learning, we ask that you record it. For the student who can't be there, they still get that experience. And so that is feedback that we continue to hear. Again, as Kelly Spees worked with the group around distance learning, that was feedback she heard from our teaching staff as well. We want to see our kids. We need to be there for our kids. We heard it loud and clear from our families as well. So there will be an expectation The frequency hasn't yet been determined.
Thank you, Andy. It looks like there's a question similar to that question for the hybrid model, so I'll pose this to Rachel and Katrina. And the question is, will all learning models that are not in person have a scheduled live instruction time for teachers that is equivalent to the time that would have normally been spent in class for that subject area, for example, as with an in-person model? And then the second part of that is, if there is something like that, will it be available and recorded for playback at later times for students?
Sure, I'll take that question. While it will likely not be possible to have an equivalent amount of live direct instruction in an online version or on a remote learning day as we would see in a face-to-face, in-person class day, we have heard and recognize that feedback, that more synchronous instruction is desired. And similar to the plans that are being made for distance learning 2.0, in our hybrid work groups, we are making plans to integrate more live synchronous meets, instruction and learning on those remote days, as well as recorded mini lessons and opportunities for students to collaborate in real time over Google Meet as well. While we're making those plans and making our synchronous instruction more robust, we also want to be cognizant and careful that we don't inadvertently put students who don't have reliable internet access or don't have the privilege of having a flexible home schedule at a disadvantage by requiring participation in those synchronous learning experiences.
Thanks, Rachel. And I'm just gonna add another question that I think relates to what you were just talking about, and this can be for either Katrina or Rachel. And this is a question about, as you described, if teachers are providing some of these synchronous learning opportunities, perhaps for students, what then would be happening with the students who they are teaching face to face on that day? So if that question makes sense to you, half the students would be at home, so there'd be some interaction likely with the teacher with those students who are at home, but the teacher also has students in class. So could you talk through a little bit of what that might look like?
Sure. Yeah, we recognize that that's going to be a challenge for our teachers to be teaching both groups of students that are in front of them and students that are at home that they're still responsible for. So as I alluded to earlier, we're really looking at that cycle of learning and where do we want to see that focused direct instruction happening? Is the best place to provide that in the classroom on in-person learning days or during remote instruction? Or are there ways to combine and do it in both formats? Where can we expect to see guided instruction with teacher feedback happening? Can we do collaborative learning groups both in person as well as on remote learning days, allowing students to take a little bit more agency and responsibility for learning with their peers? And then where do we appropriately place that independent learning and practice to make sure that all of those types of instruction are well balanced and are occurring within an in-person and a remote day kind of combined learning cycle?
Thank you, Rachel. A couple of questions coming in here now next around support services and precautions, some of the cleaning type questions. So Rod, I'm going to pose this first question to you. What are the cleaning procedures during the day between classes? So if there's a hybrid model, for example, and at the end of each day?
The cleaning processes between classes will be, there'll be available things to wipe things down, high-touch areas, making sure that we're looking into some products right now that have a long-term of up to 90 days protection to help us give additional protection with, that is sponsored by the health departments and the CDC, looking at that. I think for the most part, it's the extra cleaning in that will be, there'll be extra cleaning to the restrooms, extra cleanings to high-touch areas, and then at the end of the day, very similar cleaning, but more intense cleaning on an annual basis, or daily basis, I should say.
Thank you, Rod. Another question that I think, Rod, would be for you. This is around school lunches. So the question is, what are plans for school lunch? And will students eat in the cafeteria? What might contactless meals look like? What are contactless meals? If you could describe a little of that.
The plan for both the hybrid and the traditional school would be to eat in the lunches in the cafeteria. As I mentioned earlier, we are purchasing and developing dividers for each of the students so that they have protection while they're having lunch during that period of time. At this point in time, we're planning on all meals being in the cafeteria, both lunch and breakfast. With regards to what a contactless meal is it means that it's plated for the student. The student can't be putting extra things on. They don't have a choice of it. It's here's what you get. You grab the plate and you're sitting in the seat where you're supposed to sit. So it's making sure that there's not multiple people touching things, grabbing things involved in it. It's just one basic lunch program.
Thank you. Questions here for John, Bloomington Online School questions. I'll pose these to you. The first question is, if my child takes the online option, will they have a live teacher providing instruction? Or will it be like back in March where we had to make an appointment with our teachers?
Thanks for that. You're hearing, I think, in all of our responses that we have had a lot more time to do sophisticated planning around all these models. And so synchronous learning and face-to-face learning, contact with your teacher is a part of all these models. So yes, there will be a balance of synchronous and asynchronous learning in Bloomington Online School. We're also looking to balance on-screen and off-screen activities, as we know that is important to families. Having a child sit in front of a computer all day is not a successful experience. So,
thank you. Another question, again, around the online program. We know that extracurricular activities and sports are really valuable for our students. So this question is, could my child enroll in the new Bloomington Online School and still participate in extracurricular activities and sports?
yeah, here's where I think we have a significant advantage over online programs that are offered outside of Bloomington. So we are partnering with schools. So our elementary partner is Washburn Elementary. Our middle school partner is Valley View Middle School, and both of our high schools have online programs, as I've described. Students would be able to participate in their home school's activity, either their boundary school area based on where they live, or one of the partner school areas.
Thank you. We'll go back to hybrid learning here for a minute. So this question will be for either Rachel or Katrina. The question is, what about specials within hybrid? So music, art, phy-ed, those types of classes. Who will continue to work with students during the hybrid model, or I'm sorry, the question is, will those continue? Will those continue to happen during the hybrid or the distance learning 2.0 models?
Sure, I'll take that question. Yes, so all of our specials, those academic areas also have required state standards in them. And so art, visual arts, music, physical education will all be offered in the hybrid model and taught by licensed teachers in those areas. We're still looking at delivery models, whether we'll be able to provide that instruction in the traditional specialist classrooms, or whether we'll have specialists rotating from classroom to classroom. So thinking about what will help ensure that our students and our staff are safe, but we will be able to provide that programming in hybrid.
Thank you, Rachel. We have another question about hybrid, but this question appears to be more related to special education, so I'm going to pose this to you, Carmen. This question is, how will the hybrid model equitably support students receiving special education services? And for students receiving face-to-face special education services 3 to 5 days per week, how does the district plan to support their needs?
Great question again. The special education work groups, again, are working closely with those teams to start with the foundational services in looking at the least restrictive environment and really talking about what is going on in those content classes across the board. So we would be looking at having IEP meetings, as I had stated earlier, to work with the families and explain what is going on at the various models. And then working on strategies that we would develop for communication with general education teachers and families that would address the adaptations, accommodations, modifications, and other supports that students would need to receive their special education services.
Thanks, Carmen. Another question for hybrid, but this time it's related to childcare. So this one I'll pose to you, Jake. The question is, will there be childcare for teachers' children if school is either in a traditional or a hybrid model?
The easy answer there is yes. We plan on providing childcare no matter what model of school we're in. What gets a little bit more challenging is if we're in a traditional model of school and say one of our teaching staff works in one of the high schools and their elementary age students' school goes into a different model of school, how do we provide childcare there? Even more complicated there is if one of our teachers lives in a nearby school district and their children go to a different school district. We're in traditional and they go to a different model. All of our classrooms are filled. Bottom line is we intend to be as flexible as possible to take care of our staff, and we hope to provide care in any model that we're in. Basically, until we receive guidance from the state, it's hard to make a definitive answer on that as well, because childcare may be mandated no matter which school district you're in.
Thank you, Jake. Lot of interesting questions around hybrid, so I'm going to keep going with the hybrid here. One additional question, and this is this person is saying, I still don't understand the hybrid model and the answer to the question earlier regarding teaching and how teachers will balance teaching in the classroom and then working with students who are at home. So I wonder if either Katrina or Rachel, you could just talk a little bit more about what sort of supports would be in place for staff or how that might work.
Sure, I can take a swing at that one. It's admittedly it's a challenge, right? It's a new challenge for our teaching staff, and so it's an understandable question. And so there's lots of ways it can happen. I think the high school hybrid instruction group was talking about some things today and talked about what would it look like if for example, might help to just think of an example. What would it look like if the kids that were at home paired up with one kid that was sitting in class face to face and they did some partner work there? Would that work? And then teachers are going around and checking with the groups as per usual. Creative solution, our teachers come up with the best solutions usually, and so that was something that kind of came up today. And so we're still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. It's admittedly, and it's a challenge to have two groups in your class working on different things. Having two groups in your class, one of them not even physically present in your class working on different things, it's an added challenge. So we're still working through exactly how that's going to work. But as a district, we're working together to collaborate and figure out what exactly that can look like and share our best ideas, and along with the rest of the education nation, figure out how that's going to work out.
Thank you, Katrina. We're not in this alone, right? There are many other districts who are working through these same challenges. That's great. Thank you for that response and that commitment to continuing the work with the teams to find some solutions. So question now that's come up, and this is a question around grading. And so this is a question for grading within each of the different models. So I think what I might do is start with Andy Kubis, because as probably many of us remember, in the spring, we shifted to distance learning. And with that shift came some changes in the way that we did grading. And so I wonder if you could just describe a little bit for us about what grading might look like if we needed to go into distance learning 2.0 this next year.
Yeah, great question. We know, pardon me, in a traditional sense, if we're back traditionally, then we would try our best to do traditional grading. In a distance learning model, we have to think about what we've talked about earlier around if we go to priority standards, then how are we assessing those standards that might have been different than had we have kids in front of us? So we'll have to think about different ways that we're going to go about doing that. Also, part of that challenge is the traditional way that we do our assessments is different. We don't have students in front of us. We're not there to support them. They might not be in a quiet environment. So we continue to look at ways, it's an admitted challenge, but we continue to look at ways that if we move into a distance learning model, how can we fairly assess students and not penalize them for being in a situation where they're not able to explain or show their mastery of a certain standard. So something we continue to work on, but we know full well that that's something we're going to have to solve. The answer can't be to try to do it like we did initially. We have to get to that answer. I think in many, as we're all talking here, we're all in the same boat that we're planning and we're planning and we're planning and we're waiting for an answer. And so I think what we're all kind of waiting for is the MDE to say, here's the way that we're going to be going, and then we can put all our resources into those, what I would say, deep level questions about how things are going to be working. They're all solvable, and like you said, everyone's trying to solve them, but we're at a point where we've planned and we're just waiting for what's next and where should we be going next.
Thanks, Andy. I think I'll pose the grading question then to a couple of others as well, because we're looking at grading in other models. So maybe first I'll ask the hybrid folks who are here tonight, so Katrina and Rachel, if you could just speak a little bit to how grading might look in a hybrid model.
Yeah, we would plan as well to return to more of a traditional grading model as well, having an emphasis on assessment, but really looking at how we become more creative at assessing students, how we put more emphasis on student projects and ongoing displays of learning that students are doing, rather than putting everything into one particular test or quiz that determines a student's grade. There needs to be a focus on really paying attention to our formative assessments, which are our day-to-day assessments that are used to drive instruction, rather than our assessments that are used primarily just for evaluative purposes because of all of the factors that are surrounding instruction in this new reality. And so we want to continue to be able to accurately capture a picture of what students know and are able to do, but to do some rethinking about how we can make those assessments really authentic within the hybrid model.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll pose that question then lastly to John Weiser with regard to our online school. Can you talk a little bit about what grading would look like there?
Yeah, we are one school system, and so we would aim toward the same efforts that Rachel just described well. We know that in an online environment where you don't have the face-to-face interaction, you do have to make some creative adjustments. As I've said, we're in our third year of online courses at our high schools, and when we've done some great analysis of those courses, we found that teachers who teach the same course in a face-to-face setting as well as an online setting have similar grading curves, have a similar amount of student success and student challenges. So we think we have a track record there and that we can build upon in terms of replicating the assessment that tells us whether students are making progress on Bloomington standards.
Thank you, John. A couple of questions here have come in around the personal protective equipment. So, Rod, I'll pose these questions to you. The first one is, you said that the district purchased masks for all staff members. Are the clear face shields an option for staff? And then also for younger students, it's extremely important for them to be able to see the faces of the teachers, is what this person is giving us as feedback.
Yeah, the groups, each of the different groups gave us a lot of the feedback on that we needed to have multiple type of options for the teachers and students. So what we have done is we've purchased multiple, both clear masks and also different types of face coverings, both, as Jake mentioned earlier, based on size and also based on need.
Thank you, Rod. All right, I have an additional question, and this will be the last question for tonight because we have just a couple of minutes left. This question will go to John Weiser around online. How does a family outside of the district open enroll in Bloomington online schools? And then if you could maybe just add what is provided to families either out from outside the district or in the district when they enroll? For example, do they need to buy their own computer?
You don't need to buy your own computer. You are a Bloomington student if you enroll in Bloomington Online School. So we're a one-to-one district. We provide devices for every student. And we pay special close attention to that Wi-Fi access, some of the challenges that you heard Director Kubis talking about overcoming in distance learning. Regarding enrollment, we have over 700 students in our district who open enroll. That is, they don't have a Bloomington address, but they enroll in Bloomington Public Schools. This would be no different than that. You'd go to our website, you'd click on the Enroll Now button, and you'd start to fill out the paperwork there for enrolling in a Bloomington school. At some point, you would identify yourself as living outside of the district, and then you would choose the Bloomington Online School as your school of choice.
Thank you, John. And as a point of clarification, I just had an additional question come in. When we talk about enrolling in an option, the option that folks can choose to enroll in is the online school. Of the other models we've looked at tonight, so hybrid, traditional, or the distance learning 2.0, there's not an enrollment period. This is something that will be decided and guidance will be provided to us from the Department of Education. So families do not need to do anything more to enroll in either the hybrid, the distance learning 2.0, or traditional. Thank you, presenters, for all of that tonight. We've come to the end of our planned live virtual event, but we continue to invite you all to continue sharing your questions and your feedback through the link that we provided earlier. And as I had mentioned, we've received a tremendous amount of feedback and questions tonight, and there are many that we've received that we haven't gotten to. So just thank you again for those questions. Continue to watch for those questions and answers on our district website. And with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce our school board chair, Nellie Corman, to say a few closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchler, and thank you to our panelists, and most importantly, you, our parents and students and staff, for joining us this evening. We all agree that we want to know what is going to happen, and we want to get back to normal as soon as possible. While there's still a lot of uncertainty about exactly what September would look like, know that we remain committed to keeping you informed as we await further state guidance. On behalf of the school board, I want to express our sincere thanks to district and school leaders, teachers, and support staff for all you have done in responding to this crisis and preparing for the fall. Please plan to join us again on Tuesday, August 11 for another community engagement live virtual event. Thank you and good night.